Hi, my name is David Petroulis, and I am here tonight to talk about my leadership and social change reflection. This is my first one. I'm kind of excited, kind of nervous, don't really know what kind of, if I'm supposed to be formal or informal, but you know what, it's okay. But yeah, we're going to be talking about leadership, and I'm going to reflect on this subject. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So the first reflection question that I wanted to talk about was reflect on the different theories and approaches discussed in a Northam text. What resonated with me the most, and if I agree or disagree with the author's writings on the evolution of leadership thinking. So the text that was mentioned was the Introduction to Leadership Concepts and Practice by Peter Northouse, I believe. It's a pretty cool book from what I've been reading so far. The first chapter basically talks about different theories on leadership and what leadership is. So whether if leadership is a skill, if it's a trait, if it's a relationship, if it's a behavior, or if it's an ability. For me personally, I believe that leadership is more of a skill. It's more of a mix of between a skill, a behavior, and a relationship. So for me, I believe that leadership is something that can be gained. It's not something that people are born with. It's definitely a skill that can grow with experience, with life experience. And I also believe that leadership is a behavior and a relationship, and leadership is also a relationship because you have to behave a certain way to be a leader. Now, it doesn't have to be a set way. There isn't one behavior that is a leadership behavior that I think there is. But I believe that there are it's different situations where you would have to have a certain leadership behavior, and I also believe that leadership is a relationship because of the in order to be a leader, you need to have some kind of relationship with your followers. As mentioned in the text, there's a difference between leadership and management, and I believe that, well, in the text it says that leadership is it seeks constructive change, but I feel leaders spend more time trying to spend more time bonding with their followers and getting to know their followers. I feel that's very important for being a leader versus a manager, where they're their relationships with their followers or their coworkers or the people who are working under them, they don't necessarily need to have that relationship. So what's unique to a leader is that there are relationships between leaders and followers, and I feel this leader would have certain skills or would have the skill of leadership in order to build relationships with the followers and also behave a certain way for the situation, behave as a leader. When it comes to the evolution of leadership thinking in Northam, I'd like to think I mostly agree with him. Before I read the text, I was never really I didn't really think about the way that the thought process of the definition of leadership has kind of evolved. But in the past, I definitely think that a lot of people thought that leadership was a skill, and that goes to, I believe it's called the great man theory, where leadership is reserved for a select few, and a lot of people believe that in the past, and they focus on how leadership is a trait, but it's excuse me. So they thought that Cleopatra or what's his name, Napoleon or Julius Caesar, or even more recently maybe Abraham Lincoln. A lot of people thought that they were born with the skills of leadership, or born with traits of leadership, and then it went from traits, and the definition of leadership or the thought process of leadership began to change. It went from traits to behavior to situational and relational to transformational, excuse me. So when it comes to going from traits from, according to the book, the 1930s and the 1940s, to more of transformational leadership to today, where you talk about how leadership changes and how there's more studies on how leadership is also centered around the relationships between leaders and followers and things like that. I'd like to agree with the evolution of leadership from the book. So that is my little thought process on question 1. So I guess we'll go on to the next question. So the second question that I wanted to reflect on was the question which asked me to ask my friends, family members, former teachers, or coaches to describe me in 3 words. And I had to reflect on the words they chose and how that helped me better understand myself as a leader. So I got in contact with a number of friends, some family members, and I believe 1 or 2 teachers. And it was actually kind of interesting how some of the words were kind of recurrent, but some of the words that came to mind or that were recurrent in the list that I was able to put together was inclusive, uplifting and supportive, caring and considerate, sensitive and emotional, charismatic, sympathetic and empathetic, and kind-hearted and altruistic. Those are a lot of adjectives, but I feel like a lot of these words which were used to describe me they're very like centered around like relationships, emotions, and like feelings, and like people. So like as a leader, and like my leadership style, it kind of like supports how when I am given a position of leadership, I'm more of like a relationship kind of oriented leader, and I try to build relationships with other people and my followers or the people who I'm working with, and I try to make sure that they feel included, and I try to see things from their point of view, and I try to build a relationship with them because I feel like that's very important as a leader. I mean, that does also kind of show how I'm not that much of a task-oriented leader and how I focus more on the people than sometimes the task. And I feel like that kind of is something like, I don't want to say it's a flaw, but it's definitely, I guess it's more or less something that isn't necessarily the best for my leadership style, because I end up but focusing more on trying to get to know the people who are within my group or the people who I am working with. I focus on them more than the task at hand. So I would end up like I wouldn't be able to get like work done as effectively as I wanted to if I focused too much on the people. So yeah, that is my little reflection on the words that I was described, and I guess we will go on to the next. So for the third and final question of this evening, I wanted to identify my 5 core values that I live by, how those values inform my leadership, and why did I choose those 5. So my 5 values are to spread kindness, be positive, show love, get to know new people, and to try new things. As I said earlier in the second question, when I was talking about like being a task-oriented leader versus like a relationship oriented leader, and how I'm more of like a relationship kind of orientated leader, these values kind of reflect that, in which I use kindness, love, and positivity in order to get to know other people and form a strong foundation for a relationship. So I use these values when I'm being a leader in the community to get to know other people and to kind of understand where they're coming from and kind of get their thought processes and trying to see where they're going when it comes to problem solving and things like that. So I chose these 5 in summation to be able to be closer to new people and to have new experiences with those people, and to basically help make the world a kinder, more loving, and positive place, because I definitely believe those 3 traits, if you have those traits, they'll definitely be reciprocated towards you. So that is that basically wraps up tonight, or this morning if you're watching this in the morning, but I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you have a good night or a good morning. Thank you so much.